Yeah. I think we should go ahead and start, and people will come in. First of all, hi everyone. Masal khair. Thank you all for joining us here, wherever you currently may be. We're here today to celebrate the launch of our latest publication. I am Maisel Beik. I'm the programs manager at Warehouse 421, and we're an art and design center in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates. Really, really honored and excited to be presenting today this book that has been in the works for quite some time, and it's really quite an accomplishment on the parts of the contributors and the curators and editors that we have here with us today. The book, How to Maneuver Shape-Shifting Texts and Other Publishing Tactics, as well as its namesake exhibition and accompanying symposium, had brought together artistic and academic research that looked at independent publishing, and it was curated by Kayfa by Younes and Maha Maamoun. And it's unpacked how independent publishing collapses the distance between its different authors and producers. It asked, how can we as artists, as writers, designers, printers, publishing institutions, navigate the difficult and rigid market-driven field of publishing and still succeed in sharing our work with a wider public? The exhibition, which had opened in November 2019, had wrapped up with a symposium in February 2020, and it also produced two Kayfa publications, the Arabic version of No ISBN by Bernard Tella and How to See the Palace Columns as Palm Trees by Hussein Nasruddin. Both were published in Arabic. So I'm not going to talk a lot. I'd leave that to the panelists and our speakers, but I'll introduce everyone we have today. With us is Younes, who is a research-based artist. Collaboration forms a big part of her practice, as do curating and publishing projects. Using objects, film, and printed matter, Younes often seeks instances where historical and political events collapse into personal ones. Ala is a member of the advisory board of the Berlinale's Forum Expanded and the Academy of the Arts of the World. She's also the co-founder with Maha Maamoun of a nonprofit publishing initiative, Kayfa, which has brought us together tonight. Maha is an artist, curator, and independent publisher. Her work examines the form, function, and currency of common visual and literary images as an entry point to investigating the cultural fabric that we weave and are woven into. In addition to a practice as an artist, Maamoun works collaboratively on independent publishing and curatorial projects. She's a founding board member of the Contemporary Image Collective, CIC, and co-founder with Younes of the independent publishing platform Kayfa. Today, we also have Deepak Unnikrishnan with us, who will be moderating the conversation. Deepak is a writer from Abu Dhabi. His book, Temporary People, won the inaugural Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing, the Hindu Prize, and the Moore Prize. Deepak's fiction was commissioned for the written publications of the National Pavilion of the United Arab Emirates at the Venice Biennale in 2017 and the Oslo Architecture Triennale in 2019. His voice and work can also be heard on musician Sarathi Korwar's album, More Arriving. We're going to actually start the event today. I know it's great. We're going to start the event today with a musical piece that was commissioned especially for the occasion, performed by Amman-based musicians Yazan Al Rousan, Bashar Hamdan, and Yazan Sarayrah. So without further from me, Ala, do you want to take it away?
One moment. زينات البلاد والرياضيات لفضل مرسومات طيبات ومؤلفات طابعة نشر كثير من النشرات وعنده المشاهير غير المعروفة وعنده ذات الثورات الذاتيات اللغات المخططة والكشف طبعات هي السلوكيات طبعنا في ذات تلك الكلمات معرفة كيف تأيي مبادرات المسلم والمرأة والأعمال غير الخاطرة التي أقصي الضاءات عامات والرغبات شركات مختلفة البحث باستمرار ممارسات نشريات مميزات غير المرات أو غير المعروفات مسائلات ولد داعيات زينات مجلات الموضوعات المنبوذات المحظورات الذاتيات المخلقات اللغات المفرطات أو حتى المتقشفات الطبعات غير المربحات المنتهيات من السوق منفيات من الطبع نافذات تلك المبهمات المدفوعات للعمل خلف المظلات العنيدات كيفتائيات
مبادرات النشر المستقلات الرؤى المرفوضة أو الأعمال غير الحاضرات تلك التي أخصيت من الفضاءات العامات أو الراغبات في المشاركات بشروط مختلفات البحث مستمر حول الممارسات النشريات المميزات غير المستقرات أو غير المعروفات المسائلات للحدود والإبداعيات والمهنيات والسياسات النضالات الواسعات لتوسيع رقعة الممكنات واكتشاف مواطن القوة والهشاشات الهائلات لبعض المقترحات المدنيات الأكثر إبداعات ضد أنظمة النشر المقيدات كيفتائيات
روايات طائرات ورقيات مغلفات مرسومات كتب كتيبات مؤلفات طابعات ناشرات وكثير من النشرات الممنوعات أو المهمشات أو غير المعروفات الموضوعات المنبوذات المحظورات الذاتيات المخلقات اللغات المفرطات أو حتى المتقشفات الطبعات غير المربحات المنتهيات من السوق منفيات من الطبع نافذات تلك المبهمات المدفوعات للعمل خلف المظلات العنيدات كيفتائيات
مبادرات النشر المستقلات الرؤى المرفوضة والأعمال غير الحاضرات تلك التي أحصيت من الفضاءات العامات أو الراغبات في المشاركات بشروط مختلفات البحث مستمر حول الممارسات النشريات المميزات غير المستقرات أو غير المعروفات المسائلات للحدود والإبداعيات والمهنيات والسياسات النضالات الواسعات لتوسيع رقعة الممكنات واكتشاف مواطن القوة والهشاشات الهائلات لبعض المقترحات المدنية الأكثر إبداعا ضد أنظمة النشر المقيدات كيفتائيات
So this is basically the lyrics are taken from the introduction of How to Maneuver, of Kayfa's introduction for How to Maneuver, and it basically outlines all the sorts of publishing practices that we've been researching and interested in researching, but also presenting or expanding on, whether in the book or in the series of exhibitions that we've as Kayfa organized between 2019 and 2020. And yeah, so this is and there was also this discussion with the musicians on how do we think of the genres that we're using in this music intervention of this music experiment with the works, with the words of Kayfa. You know, how do we speak? How Kayfa presents itself, versus how can we bring these these statements or these descriptions into a space where it can be memorized and first of all understood, but also understood probably through the practice of or the process of memorizing it and repeating it in the form of a song. So this was our experiment. It's still it will always be a work in progress, because we'll always think about how do we mix these sounds and what do we bring to the fore. And there were also these ideas of bringing some of them making of inside the song itself. So these might be also future versions of the work in the future.
So could I step in and ask
Yes.
you guys a question? It's terrible to follow musicians because there's no segue, because you just appear and you start talking and it's horrible. But Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I don't know where you people are when you're listening in or where you're listening in from. My job is just to ask questions. So here's my first one. Just picking up on what the musicians were basically saying, kefata, 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 kefata. What is it with respect to the publishing? Because I think a beginning would be useful, especially for those who do not know. So to ask a very straightforward question to the two of you, Ala and Maha, how did kefata begin? And I'm also interested in the why. So take your time.
Who begins?
Well, you two have to find it out first.
Okay, I can just start by saying that before Ala and me started Kayfa, we already had like worked together. We worked together. We are both artists, and we were both concerned with how to kind of create public platforms to make art more accessible to wider audiences. So this has been a concern that we both shared, and we thought of different approaches, whether it's showing video, creating platforms that facilitate for people to be able to see video works instead of, if you miss the exhibition in Cairo, then you haven't seen it, or if you're not able to travel, then you don't see. So this was kind of something we thought about for a bit, and then we also both had an interest in producing books, and we started the Kayfa from an interest in the book as a medium that is also not bound by more exclusive artistic spaces. So it's a medium that can be shared in any bookstore, for example. It's also we were also interested in writings by artists or writings that circulate more in art publications or in events that are in art spaces. There's certain writers who you come to know through these circles, but not through any other circle. And vice versa, there are very interesting writers who are not necessarily taken into like more specialized directions, or whose publications remain in a mainstream, even though the writing is actually quite experimental or complex, and can also be tapped into by other. So we wanted to break these divisions, right? To kind of bring these circles closer to each other, whether the circles of writers or of readers. So to kind of mix these different kinds of writings, but what is common is this kind of experimental spirit, to mix them in one series that is accessible in public bookstores. So that's one beginning, but there's different beginnings.
My beginning was that we were in a bookshop in Berlin, and we were, besides everything that Maha spoke about, which is absolutely true, we were also in a bookshop in Berlin, and we were just like trying to see what we want to buy, and there were so many nice books, and we were thinking that, and they were very expensive, or they were like 20 euros upwards, and I was thinking, if I want to get a series of 4 books, like 4 books from one series or something, then it's like an investment. And I was thinking, why is this not necessarily available, this variety of content, but also of looks and feels, like in our like Arabic resource libraries and so on. And this is when we were like holding something and saying, let's make nice books and cheap books, but very good books. And I feel that was the point when I was feeling that maybe this is when we start to make books.
Ala,
Would you
hold up the books, because yes, you sort of did this so that we can see them? Because I have a very specific question about this. So I have one of them, which is here. And this was gifted to me by you 2 years ago. This is How to Mend Motherhood and Its Ghosts by Iman Marcel. And sorry, this sounds like merchandising at this point, but there's a point to this. And this is the new volume, right? And I'm going to do something now, and hopefully you can hear me. I'm basically just doing this with the books. I'm sheafing through the pages. And at this point in time, given that there is the pandemic, and I hope everyone's all right and your family's okay, just to do this feels very important. And I know, Maha, when we were talking yesterday, you mentioned someone told you that this feels like a book you can hold. And I'd like to dig deeper into that because the practice is also about the exhibition. So I'm curious about the transition, the kind of transition that happens from publishing books to bringing it to a space where it's exhibited. So you can take this in any direction you like. And this is also my long-winded way of saying to all those of you who are watching, if you get to hold this, please hug it and read it, because there's something about it that's just quite wonderful, especially now. So please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we were interested, just like the tangible part was very important for us. So to make printed books, you know, books printed on paper, that was very important, because we also, we like how these books circulate. Just like there is a way that books, ebooks circulate, and there is the kind of audiences that ebooks find, there's another kind of audience that printed books find, and the way they travel from hand to hand and then end up in a secondhand bookstore, or end up in the newspaper stand, or like how, or somebody sees them in a friend's living room, you know, that this way of moving was interesting for us and still is. But also, yeah, we are also artists, and we were always concerned with the art space and the exhibition space, and we see like what these two have, like sharing work, artistic work in an exhibition, or sharing work published in a book. It's the aim is always to share it with the public and to have a conversation. So this was a very like for us, they're like clearly intersect. But also there was an intersection like growing over the past few years, the increased interest from artistic circles in publishing as a medium, you know. So we also found ourselves doing that without realizing, oh, this is kind of like a feeling that is shared by many at the moment, and there must be a reason for that. But amongst the people who are interested in the book format or in publishing as a subject in itself, there's a lot of artists, and they produce work, and this work like they engage with this idea of publishing as we know it, or they experiment with this idea of what is the public now? How can we? Who shapes it? How do we enter this public space? Who is excluded from it? And all of these questions, which a lot of the artists whom we invited to the show in the end were already thinking about these issues. And so we were very happy to find artists who are engaged in these questions anyway, and to be able to share their work in this exhibition format, which included sometimes books, but also sometimes sculptures, installations, video work, so different mediums.
Alla?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought you were going to add on to that. You know, this is the perfect professor-student moment. Yes, do you have anything to say? Let me ask you a question then related to this. I'm going to cite something from the book itself, because this line just struck me. So this is from page, you know, the text is on page 269. The title is "The Proposal is a Publication Format." The writer is Rafat Majzoub. And I'm citing this from page 271. The most exciting thing about a proposal is its potential, what it dreams to do. And this is something as a writer that I think about quite a bit. So I'm curious about what sort of trace either of you are interested in leaving behind with something like Kefata. In other words, do you want the work that's put out to be read by this generation, the next generation? Or do you want it to just disappear at some point? And the reason I ask is because when I started reading the book, the first chapter actually, which is The Place of the Writer by Haytham al-Wardani, he talks about the Moroccan writer Muhammad Shukri, the book Streetwise, which is on my office desk because I found it in a secondhand bookstore. And I always meant to read it, but I've never gotten down to it. But as soon as I saw that chapter and I read that line about the writer, I told myself, once the chaos is over, I'm going to walk over to my office, pick up this book and read it because it meant something to someone. So I know this is a long-winded question / response, but I'm curious, what kind of traces are either of you interested in leaving behind? And since I put Ala in an awkward position, now I'll make it less awkward. Ala, would you like to go first?
I'm mainly interested in the present moment, I must say, that we are in a moment that is challenged by so many things, by our own earnings, by the things that we learn, by the things that we want to unlearn, and by the so many forces that either easily or sometimes cunningly take over our lives or take over so much space of our thinking and so much space of our consumption of our own, consumption, but also like how ideas come to us. It's very much shaped by all these forces around us. And I feel that with the size of books that we're trying to work on, with the pocket size, for these Kayfa books, that insisting on being in the present, particularly in this moment, and in making this content available and accessible in every possible way that we know. Like we carry these books in our luggage. We try all sorts of things, and we have also so many friends and readers who are also moving these books in all sorts of directions. And I feel that this partnership has been really very hopeful in terms of how we can also speak together, think together, share things together, while also reflect on the moment and what is coming in its way. So yeah, what I want to say is that the traces that I'm interested in are traces that are very effective in the present that we're in, of just demonstrating in this process what sort of communities we can be, and then as we do this, and as we also research the work of other publishers, we're also seeing how what comes out of all these processes, what came out of previous projects, what can come in the future. This is what I feel. Yeah, these are the traces that I'm interested in.
And it's interesting to hear you say that, partly because Ahmed Makia is in the volume, an artist, researcher, writer I respect. And we collaborated on a few projects a few years ago. One in particular, which is the state, at least when we were doing a few things, our intention was about the present, exactly as you're voicing it now, because we didn't know whether people were going to seek out the book years later. And when I was at Warehouse 421 to listen to you and Maha and all the other publishers who had arrived, there was something about seeing volumes of the state there, because we just expected it to disintegrate and nobody would pay attention. So I guess you're also talking about a certain kind of intimacy. And if I may ask a follow-up to that. And before I do, for those tuning in, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section, and I'd be more than happy to field that right now, so that it doesn't feel as though I'm just lecturing. So my question is related to the relationship between the publisher and the writer, because you mentioned the relationship between publishers and other publishers, and there's joy in that. But what kind of writer are you seeking for projects such as this? What kind of relationship could you possibly build with a writer who's seeking a certain kind of immortality, that they want to be read over and over again by different generations and not necessarily disappear, because they're not just about the present, they're also about everything else? I said one question and I asked you three, sorry. Maha, you can jump in at any time as well.
I can maybe just start by saying that in the beginning, when we started, we were kind of choosing, we still do, they're all kind of commission texts. So far, we have not been accepting proposals, or just because when we started this project, we kind of had an intuitive feeling as to who are the writers we want to commission, because we kind of felt okay. So this project started in 2012, which is like a very very tense moment in the Arab world with all the revolutions and attempted revolutions and all of this. And it was a moment of change and a moment of kind of throwing out the old and discovering the new. And this is why when you read like the synopsis on Kayfa, like how it describes itself in the books, it's kind of searching for, it says like it is interested and searching for new languages and tools and subjectivities, sentiments that are felt to be important for the moment, for the present moment. And we started by commissioning writers whom we felt really had something very special in how they thought about the present moment and about what it needs. And when we commission a writer, we usually ask them, so what is it that you feel is important to talk about now? What do you personally feel is important to talk about now to the general public? We also specify that. So it's not like a closed, art talk or closed specialized talk. It's really having in mind that you're addressing a general public and with something that you feel is important to address now. So they come up with the titles of the books because these are the questions that they propose to answer. So they bring up the subjects, and this is how it goes. So this is how we've been choosing, starting a collaboration with writers. And I feel writers who collaborate with us, they know that in the end, this is a small alternative publishing project. So even though they may be thinking about posterity and eternity, they also know that they are they are interested in the space that this project opens or the kind of audiences that this project is trying to reach. So there is, I would say that possibly writers who choose to work with us are aware of the general kind of publishing situation in the moment and aware of where alternative publishing projects are in that general map and what they are trying to do. And they also support that, I guess, it's so it's maybe writers who want to exit the kind of mainstream commercial way of packaging and distributing books. Maybe they have an interest in exiting that or in approaching it from a different way. Or they're interested in books also and to have their writing in kind of more cheaply priced books so that they can reach a wider audience maybe. So I'm just now speaking on behalf of the writers. I don't know.
No, of course, and I didn't mean to ask you to tell me whatever everyone was practically thinking of when they were doing these things, but it's fascinating to hear you say this because now I've always considered the book as an object, and that's one of the reasons why I did this in the beginning, and I'll continue to do that. But then occasionally even I'm struck by how surprised I am and pleased by what I see. Another example would be the Rainy Days series by Alias. And I was reading the text and all of a sudden there's a little paragraph and just images. And that's all I got. And I felt myself returning to the pages repeatedly just to take a look at them. And I'm pointing that out simply because this feels like a book that's not just intimate, that you need to take your time with, which is something that I miss, which speaks more about my age than anything else. But I think looking at the texts and having the text respond to you a certain way as a writer is an incredible feeling. And something I should also point out to those listening in, there is dreaming going on in here. There's idealism in here. There are thoughts in here and reflections that aren't necessarily packaged or commercialized. That makes you wonder. And that's precisely why I think you're getting the questions you're getting in the chat box about, where do I get this book? Yep, those are the images. And you can't help but stare and linger. I'd be curious to know if anyone wants to ask a question in person. Please let us know in the chat box and we can make sure that happens. Or if any of the artists who are in attendance have anything to say, please let us know as well, because I'm sure Maha and Ella would be happy to hear from all of you, depending on who it is. But I can really keep going. I have another question.
Just to mention that these images are rotated, so we should be looking like this.
Absolutely. Could I ask you one more question? Because I'm fascinated by this. I'm just curious about inclusion and exclusion. What does that necessarily mean? Because I was reading Nupur Desai's piece in here, where she talks about little magazines in the Indian subcontinent, and she goes back decades. And there was a need to bring these little magazines out in multiple languages, not just in English. But what does that mean to either of you? Because in my head, and now I'm being quite banal about this, an art space is a privileged space. It's a space that that thinks about exclusion, and it's not necessarily about inclusion. But that might be because I grew up here, and here in the Gulf, in order to be an artist, you have to belong to a certain social strata, in my opinion. But I'd be curious about whether your ideas about inclusion and exclusion have evolved over time, from the beginnings of Kefata to the fact that it is now a living thing, an exhibition that can walk and breathe and communicate with publishers and writers and artists.
Yeah, if I just quickly answer bits of this question, I think it also answers a bit of your previous question. When we were researching this project, when we were researching for the first Kayfa show, which was at the Beirut Art Center, and its title was How to Reappear, and we didn't know at the time that it's going to be How to Reappear. We were when we were looking, we weren't sure what we are looking for, because we wanted to put together a show on publishing, and we knew that it was not about books. It was about the act of publishing, the process of publishing, the effort, the promise of publishing. We knew these words, and these words were coming out anyways from these conversations that we were going through, either between ourselves, but also with the people that we are meeting, or the people who were coming to us with suggestions. When we say that we're putting together a show on publishing, someone would mention something about a book, or artists who are working with, I don't know, books, or have books in their installation, or libraries, or and these were interesting questions, because they kind of defined to us what the project is not about. It was not about books as such, although so many people like to come to the show because it was full of books. So this inclusiveness, or exclusivity or inclusive aspect in these shows, yes, it is a show that is curated by two artists. It is a publishing project that is considered a publishing artistic practice. It is organized in an art institution, White Cube, if you may say. It was 1,000 square meters. How does this stand out in 1,000 square meters space? So this is these challenges. In fact, these issues were part of how we were, thinking about showing publishing, publishing effort and publishing practices, and they were also the entry points to bring more people, and probably more interest, to have more people interested in this joint space between what is expected to be a literary space and art space, which is exactly what is Kayfa and how Kayfa started at the beginning. Yeah, that it's trying to bridge a gap between in the art world or sphere, whatever, we are reading certain things that I just described also in Berlin, that we don't necessarily, if we speak to people outside these circles, maybe they don't know about. How do we bridge this gap? How do we make people who are on the streets know about what we are reading, and share it or read it at the same time? So I remember there was a talk by Simone Fattal, who's an artist who's also a publisher. She had a post-Apollo press project, which is the Post-Apollo Press, which was a publishing house between in the States between 82 and 2012 and so. And we, in the show in Beirut, we brought together, we made the effort to bring all the publications she published, around more than 70 books. We traced them around the world so that we put together her publishing effort. That's what we wanted to make visible, the publishing effort of Simone Fattal or of the Post-Apollo Press. So it was not just about the books being next to each other, like how I do with these, like, you know, when I carry the kefata books like this. It was also about the process. So there is a publishing effort as titles, but there is also the process that we also wanted to expose. And we were lucky to find out that she had deposited some of her archives or working papers in Berkeley, but she still had some papers, some of these documents in her Paris residence. And we managed to bring original materials from her Paris residence to show in the show, and also images from the Berkeley collection. And we made a timeline, and in this timeline we can follow not just the emergence of a book, but what makes a book, the conversation between the publisher and the writer, the publisher and the bookshop, the publisher and the library. You know, all these relations that people try to communicate to us as the outcome of a publishing process through, you know, this artist works with books, but okay, who made these books? And what's the making of these books? It's not about including a book, it's about the process of making a book or making any other content. It was not only about books anyways. So this is the space that I think that we're trying to explore here. So it's not about like printed matter, but it is about it. And it's not only about printed matter, and it's not only about words, and it's not about only like, you know, seeing things. And just to also speak a little bit about the title, the two titles of these two shows, we have How to Maneuver and How to Reappear. So our first book is How to Disappear by Hatham Al-Wardani, who wrote the text that you mentioned about the importance of an artist being dead. But our first, like, as we were trying to so this book is about, like, you know, disappearing, trying to just like be somewhere in where you are without people noticing and without you noticing and all of this. But in the process of curating these shows, we were thinking that we were already invisible, too invisible to stay invisible, huh? And we were challenged by, for instance, this other books that we had when they are out of copies, and they are, you know, until the book is out of print or is not accessible in the market, the publishers like us, who are not publishers as such, you know, they're not a publishing house, and we don't have a logo that people identify as they see it at the time. Now maybe we have better conditions, but yeah, we were. People would say, would attribute the books that we make to other institutions because they're institutions. And but only when the book is out of print, this is when they start to ask who's the publisher, and they tag our names. And out of a sudden, we are on the spot that we have to respond to this lack of, the book is not available in the market, and as publishers, we should. And we were thinking that we remain invisible until this question of where's the book or where's the content is there. And so are all these other, publishing initiatives that we're interested in. And perhaps if we dedicate this 1,000 square meters to these bodies, these invisible bodies of publishers, maybe this becomes like invisible, gives a bit of visibility as a practice, or as something that exists there and people can identify and name as something. And this is where the title came from, How to Reappear. As if we resided in this, like we like to be invisible because we can work under the radar, we can move easily, we can print as much as we want, we can produce other content and so on. But at the same time, this also has its other aspect, which is basically how do we help each other if we don't know who we are, who the other is like us, they are there, and so on.
And may I also say, Ala, that this is something you and Maha should know. I owe a debt of gratitude to the two of you because I was teaching this morning and I'm teaching a fiction class, and I was teaching a book that was published by Cassava Republic, basically A Stranger's Pose, which I wouldn't have known about if I hadn't attended the seminar earlier, the symposium, sorry. And because I met Bibi Bakare Yusuf and we had a conversation, and I asked her, who do I read? And she mentioned Emmanuel Uduma. And that is also part of visibility, because technically what you're also talking about is a conversation. And since I don't want this to be just between the three of us, I know artists are listening in. So if anyone wishes to sort of voice their opinion about the collaboration that eventually ended up here in the book by Kefata, please let us know. Or if you have a question that you would like to ask Maha or Ella, let us know that too. So I'm going to take a moment of silence so I can shut up, so people can sort of pause and reflect on anything at all based on what you've heard. And if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box or in the chat box, depending on what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, we know that Hussein Nasruddin and Huda Abi Faris are with us, and each one of their contributors in the book, but also in the exhibitions that we've put together. So maybe we invite them to say a word or two. So the illustration on this book is by Hussein Nasruddin, and the book How to See Palace Columns as Palm Trees is also by Hussein. So far it's only in Arabic, but should be coming soon in English.
Just say hello to the other artists who are with us here. لحظة حسين، أهلا حسين. هقول بس أرحب بالآخرين. So I'll just say that with us also online is Ali Ayal, who's also an artist, was in the exhibition and in the book. And let me scroll down. We said Huda Abi Faris, Muad Musbahi, Nooper Desai, Ra'fat Majzoub. And yeah, they all have great contributions in the book, and if they'd like to speak at any time, please just send in the chat. And hello, Hussein.
Hello.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time indeed, yes.
Your hair is short.
All is well. I've lost so much hair since, yeah.
So Hussein, maybe you tell us about your publishing investigation experience, or I mean these collaborations that we've done together between Kayfa and your work, and yeah.
Yes. Okay, so I think a good place to start is the illustration that's on the cover. I think it can serve as a good entry point to my contribution to the exhibitions and the book. So I think this one that's on our cover. I think this whole thing started from this image of a library burning and all these sources disappearing and the implications of that. And with Maha and Ala, for all the shows that we did together, we kind of studied these implications of the unpublished, or what exists outside of the canon and what has disappeared and tries to find its way back to the literary canon or the artistic canon. And I mean, the title, how to reappear or how to disappear or how to maneuver, also was very, very adequate, because all the work that I've been doing, and also with the small Kayfa book, the red one, that I did in collaboration with Maha and Ala, it's about this idea of texts disappearing because of many reasons, and then finding their ways back in different forms and different shapes, and in a way shape-shifting. The text I presented in this book in How to Maneuver Shape-Shifting Text and Other Publishing Tactics is around 3 anecdotes or 3 stories that are semi-fictional that kind of try to explain strange phenomena that occurred throughout centuries of publishing and writing and research around Arabic poetry. The first one being strange footnotes that appeared in an Andalusian historic book saying that palm trees were planted in a place and they appeared in another place, specifically saying that palm trees were planted in Al-Rasafa in the Levant, in Damascus, and they appeared miraculously in Al-Rasafa in Cordoba in Spain centuries later. So I linked this anecdote to another story around the story of my own father, actually, who was like a poetry book ontologist. And in the story, I describe how suddenly 2 books that he was editing on Umayyad poets kind of lost their content suddenly, and he was only left with the footnotes of these books. And the third anecdote is around Abu Hayyan al-Tawhidi, also a late Abbasid historian and author who kind of burnt all his books towards the end of his life. So in this story, linking these 3 stories together in this contribution, I kind of reflect on the idea of publishing, of writing, and what does it mean to its author, and what it becomes after it had been somehow consumed, or after it had complete or reached its complete form, and what happens to that, which all in a way bring us back to this burning library that can never be complete, and the text that also kind of eats itself from inside out and never show us its entirety.
Yeah, very nice.
Can you tell us a little about the work in the exhibition, because it's also...
Yeah, so in the exhibition, I also in the same realm of poems and lost texts and their footnotes, I have presented several works. The main one was these columns that you can see in the images. I can talk about these a little bit, and then I can talk about also the prints. So these are the columns that this was a lecture, like a performance actually called Improvising Abdullah the Killed. And this performance kind of borrows from traditions around Arabic poetry in which the poet comes to a scene, in a battle scene, or comes to see the house of a loved one, and they would just improvise verses, like very long and elaborate verses of poetry on the spot, and how these verses that were improvised would later be forgotten by their own poet and remembered by someone else who had heard them and deformed a million times before they get to the actual ontologies and history books. So the performance kind of picks up on that in a background of reproduction of objects and these columns that are made out of molds that wear out. Each time a column is produced, the mold wears out a little bit more. So it negotiates also this idea of reproduction of literature and poetry and culture somehow. And the second work is around descriptive poetry. It's a genre in Arabic poetry that describes and details architectural monuments. So the poet would just go to a monument and try to describe it in poetic verses. And the interesting part is that centuries after that, the monument would vanish and disappear, and what only remains is these verses that were crafted by the poet to describe this monument. So the second work, that is called Hanging Notes on the Red Castle, kind of negotiates this question of what happens to these monuments when they start existing only in language and when no actual remains of them are visible. So it works around notes of ontologists that were folded for years inside books, exposed to the sun and to the natural elements, and changing little by little, kind of exposing what these monuments lost and what the text couldn't carry in itself. In a way, I argue poetically that the sunprints on these papers is what the poems could not tell or show, and is a kind of bringing back what these monuments lost when they became language. So yeah, these are images from that work.
Thank you, Hussein.
May I use this to piggyback on a question that's come to us from someone who's of a younger generation, an art maker, and all of your art makers, whether you helped in the production of this volume or contributed towards it. And I'm just going to read the question out loud. Could you perhaps share a few words on what you both think on the future of independent publishing and art/writing in the region, especially with the increased use of digital spaces? And with Hussein's example, we are seeing something where the text was relevant, important, almost disappeared, and he's sort of resurrecting it in an artistic space. So I'm curious about either of yours position on this. And I know you can't speculate on the future, but what is the future? Unfair of me to ask, but it's not my question, it's coming.
What is the future? What is the future? I don't know. I mean,
maybe I'll just say that yeah, there's two questions, and there's the question concerning what's the future of independent publishing and art writing in the region, especially with the increased use of digital spaces. I don't think they are, like that. The increased use of digital spaces affects negatively the independent publishing and art writing. But I feel I live in Cairo, and from what I see around me is that there is a rising need for independent publishing, and and people really need to start doing that more and more, because there is also a rising number of kind of more classical publishing houses, but a lot of the genres that are more experimental, or like poetry, or like collections of short stories that are not accepted by these publishers for commercial reasons, and there's a growing kind of sense that, okay, we need to start doing these things ourselves if none of the publishers are going to take this kind of writing. So I feel this sentiment is rising, and people are more curious about how they can navigate that space, but nothing is really being done yet, but I hear like writers discussing. So I feel the future should have definitely more experiments, more people trying to publish in independent ways and alternative ways, and to kind of break the stronghold of kind of more established publishing houses. And the more people do that, the more you kind of get to have a bigger, more diverse idea of what people are thinking, what people are writing about. You just have a richer kind of culture. So I hope that is the future, rather than a clamp down by big platforms, whether they are digital or physical.
And based on Kayfata's own history, do either of you believe evolution is necessary? Because it feels as though it might be, but I don't know. As a writer, I'm not sure, but I think it should be essential. But as publishers and artists, as conversation makers and conversation seekers, is evolution necessary?
Evolution in what sense?
Evolution in the sense that Kayfata started off as, I'm going to hold it up again, that.
Yeah.
And then it sort of grew up, was fed Cerelac and became this. But it's also not just this. It's not just the book. It's also conversation. It's symposiums. It's seeking out people. It's talking to people, having them talk to other people. It's a living thing. And it's something quite wonderful about that. And to me, as I'm saying a neutral observer, even though I know the two of you, it feels as though it has evolved. And for me as a writer, that's something to sort of celebrate. And I'm not necessarily being idealistic. It's just me being hopeful. And given the times we live in now, because of clampdowns and giant platforms, I feel evolution might be essential. In a way, I've sort of in a long-winded way answered my own question. I didn't mean to do that. But I'm curious as to whether there's something else that the two of you are thinking of with respect to everything else that's already been done. And I believe there is one more question after that. And thank you very much, Hussein. I didn't mean to cut you off at all. I was just hoping I could steal your thunder a little bit and piggyback on the question that was asked.
Maybe I quickly say that yeah, we thought of books, then we thought of ebooks. No, then we thought of audiobooks, then we thought of ebooks, and then we thought of exhibitions, and then now music pieces, and then we thought of new books, that are not like the old books. So there are bigger books, thicker books, more like our research, but in books. And then we like this experiment with music. Like, what if we try songs? Like, what is, like, if we keep saying that we're not mainstream, and we know someone can help, like, craft it in a way that it can become mainstream somehow. So how do we do it? I think this is the evolution that as I imagine it, like in Kayfata's story. As we do this, the books are going into their own directions. So we have now a network. We're trying now to set up a network, a network of independent publishers with Orakunan through then the circulation of a newsletter. So now we have a network, but a newsletter. So it's just growing in certain ways that are like that. These ways are already existent. I mean, we haven't invented anything new yet. It's just we're trying these networks and trying collaborations within these networks just to, just make connections, more connections. And this is what Kayfa will continue doing, is just expand these networks. Yeah, what I wanted also to say is that readers of our books, they take them to their classes. And, some of our books already being taught, I don't know, 3 years ago, started being taught 3 years ago in, I don't know, places like Kassel and other places. So, and these were efforts that we haven't done. And we haven't pushed anyone to teach the book. But it's just ended up, so sometimes when I'm talking to someone, they say, yeah, we know these books because our teacher brought them to class. And so I think it just takes its own, different lives. We try, like, we go through a particular things that we go through, but then the books are circulating in their own life, in their own way, and taking new lives themselves, sometimes without us knowing totally not knowing about them. And this is what I feel is interesting, and what is shaping the future of this publishing initiative, is that it has the ability to just exist on its own once it's out there. And Huda is with us.
One of your contributors as a question.
Huda. Great to see you.
May I just bringing her on board?
Thank you. Nice to be with you and listen to all these wonderful talks. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. Thank you.
You're not interrupting.
Thank you for your wonderful contribution and the book as well.
I'm dying to see the real thing, I have to say. After this presentation, it's even more exciting than seeing it with what I'm used to. So I was like, oh, I want it now. Okay. I don't know. I mean, my contribution, do you want me to say something brief about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I did my PhD actually doing research on publishing in the Middle East. And specifically, I was interested in publishers and designers that contributed in some ways to cultural production through their work. And for this publication, Maha and Ala invited me to specifically make part of one of my chapters on Dar al-Fata al-Arabi, to write about this publishing initiative, which everybody which I think is also still remains a very good example of independent publishing with a kind of cultural mission. And so this is basically a historical contribution in a way, like I did not invent anything here. But just talk about that, and also talk about kind of the relation between the design aspect of these books and the messages they were trying to bring forward, and the engagement of the artists, the illustrators, the designers, the publisher, everybody that contributed to this. So there was also these books were also a kind of like and this publishing house was also a kind of way of networking before social media in a way. So there was like a community of people, which I find, in also this initiative, you see some resonance in it, and also in other, younger publishing houses. And my interest in this topic was basically, I'm a book designer myself, and I started, a publishing house specifically on publishing on design in the Middle East. And also one of the projects that we launched was also to do with, publishing on icons of design that are not, that have not gone into the canon of international or even, Middle Eastern design history. And so looking at, specific people and their contribution, their work, and, their background, how they got into design, why they got into design, and what is the effect of their design on society. So they're not cheap books, they're more, but they are small monographs. And so this was, for me, this research was actually kind of launched into this project because I was very curious. So it's almost like, teaching yourself something and then realizing, well, there's a potential to do something else. So I find, this initiative of Kayfa also really close to my heart on every possible level. And also because it's about, something you find, you have a feeling like it's also came at a moment when there was a need for publishing. And I think it's interesting in this discussion to talk about publishing beyond just printed books, because publishing is, the question that came up about this, if online media are going to be a hindrance, is actually also a form of publishing. And I think that, I don't know, from my experience as an independent publisher, it's not a very long experience either, is that you have to find a way to kind of lay these networks and use all these different publishing platforms, from audio to video to printed, and kind of like keep on, generating work for all these platforms. If I have too much to say, I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Go ahead, Anna.
What I wanted to say is it was amazing to read your PhD thesis, Huda, because it also brought to our attention very interesting aspects about projects from projects that exist amongst us now, and we consider perhaps as mainstream, or as they are private institutions or they're private publishing houses, but they are so strong to the point that they are, we cannot penetrate, we cannot go inside them, we cannot partner with them, and we start our own, projects and networks outside these realms. And just to see how they came together and how you analyze this path to, strength, or to this independence, like financial, but also like as an institutional independence, through a design project as well. I mean, part of it was content, but it was also presence. It was also about how they looked like, and what sort of how they were thought of in terms of how do they speak to their readers from their covers, or from their sizes, or from their tactility, as we also started to discuss in this beginning. And this is like I think is a very interesting aspect when we are also thinking about art and thinking about publishing as artistic practice, and thinking about also these exhibitions of books as objects, but also as outputs of publishing processes that include so many decision makers, sometimes all you know, they are all one, or they are so many. Yeah, it was very interesting, and also to think of the examples that you've mentioned in the book was really helpful to us. So in your thesis, so thank you very much for being with us and partnering with us here. And in the Amman version of the show, we included the series of monographs on the artists and designers that you've produced, and it was interesting because we showed them in the Dar al-Fatah al-Arabi, next to Dar al-Fatah al-Arabi installation. And as I was giving the tour in the exhibition, it was interesting as I was talking, you know, speaking about Dar al-Fatah, and then I turned to these books and say, and the makers of these books are in, like, you know, are in the research of these books. And it's just to, and then people pick up the books and see other works, you know, and identify other works that these designers or illustrators have done in other realms. And they, you know, so it's not just Dar al-Fatah, and we start to understand what is our visual culture made of. What we read, by what we see, what we consume, what is shaped by others for us, and so on. How is it someone's artistic project, you know, like Labad or someone, you know, becomes like your own cultural identity or your own visual culture reference. So it was a very eye-opening.
Yeah, and what was nice about some of these designers like Labad or Helmi Touni, for example, just to name two, they worked for several of these publishers at different stages. So they worked for children's publishing, but they also worked for, you know, like مؤسسة العربية لدراسات ونشر. They worked for Dar al-Hilal. And what was really beautiful, and you see it resonating in a lot of the work of the designers, is that they felt that the book was a means to bring art to like a non-elitist audience. So you don't, you know, the intimidation of going to an art gallery or going to, maybe it's less in our days and there was in their times, but it still is. Going to a museum requires a very different thing than just picking up a book to read a story that is also entertaining or enlightening, and then seeing art in it, which is in the cover or in the illustrations inside. And so this idea of a book as a kind of like traveling museum, not just for ideas, but also for visual culture, was very appealing to me. And it was something that I think, yeah, this is inspiring. I like that. I mean, as a book designer, I think
the book and also the
enriches my approach to designing books also.
I think the book and the design effort, it's the design and the publishing effort. I think they are also traveling agents, you know, as you call it, and the publishing as agent, you know, in your.
Okay.
I don't know how we're doing with time, because I know.
Yeah, I was about to interject and play the policeman and say we are done, but I'll do that gently.
Okay.
I want to take a moment to congratulate you both. And thank you so much, Huda. And I've read your text. I think for me, what's been quite enlightening and illuminating is discovering artists and writers and researchers I didn't know much about. And now I can use their names and teach them in classes and call out their names in conversation with other people, which I think is important. Publishing also is about orality, which is basically what we're doing now. If we were in a different time, we would be in a room with each other, talking, conversing, and lingering. Over Zoom, during the age of COVID, things are different, but we're doing our best. So I want to take a moment to again congratulate Ala and Maha and Kayfa on this. Bravo. To all the artists who've tuned in, bravo to you all. I have read you and I have learned. So thank you for that. It's an act of generosity that I don't think I can necessarily duplicate, but I'm grateful for. And I know Maya's is an announcement. It's related to how do I get the book? Which again, like I said, I'm going to do it one last time, forgive me. Just hearing it is just so wonderful, so that I can hold it. And then after that, go ahead, Anna, go ahead.
Before Maisa makes her announcement, I just want to, first of all, thank all the contributors, each contributor for like in the exhibitions or in the book. And I would also like to thank, we would like to thank also Warehouse for partnering with us on this, for making this happen. And to thank Anton Stuttgart, the designer of our publication, for his patience and his creative ideas. And to thank you, Deepak, for such an insightful and enjoyable, like really, you were the best and the first, in fact, the last person we would think of for this conversation. because we know how like sensitive you can be, how sensitive of a reader you are, and an observer you are. And what else? And yeah, I would like also to thank the Jordanian group, the musicians who worked really hard on making something that is very hard to singable. Yeah, so yeah, Yazan and Bashar and their teams, and yeah, we're good.
Shukran, Anaba. I join my voice to Alex in thanking everyone, and yeah, now we move to Maisa's announcement. Thank you.
A brief announcement, but I did also want to thank you guys. Thank you so much, Deepak, for this. Thank you, Huda and Hussein, for joining us on this conversation. And, you know, last but not least, Ala and Maha for not just this conversation, but really everything from the book to the symposium, back to the exhibition, and everything that has sort of spiraled beyond that. Thank you to all the contributors that are with us and that are not with us today. And Mabruk, congratulations. The announcement, I mean, not to sort of blow it, but the book is available at Warehouse 421 currently for purchase. Do stay tuned. If you're not able to come to Abu Dhabi, we're widening the sort of distribution network, and Kayfa will also have more news on that very soon. If anyone has any closing remarks before we wrap up, we're going to wrap up with a repeat performance of the music piece.
Yeah, so the musicians couldn't be with us also today, like in one room to perform because we have a curfew in Amman for 4 days, and yeah, it just makes it impossible for for gatherings to happen of any sort. So we had to record it, and we will be posting this song subtitled on Kayfa pages and perhaps on Warehouse. Yeah, so I'm going to share the song again. And thank you, everybody. And thank you very much, Mais, for being there with us in every step of this these collaborations with Warehouse and outside.
It's my pleasure. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night, day, morning, afternoon, evening.
زينات مجلات وطائرات ورقية مرسومات كتيبات مؤلفات طابعات ناشرات كثير من النشرات ومهمشات غير المعروف موضوعات وذات التراث الذاتيات لغات المخططة والتخصص طبعات منتهيات السلوكيات طبعنا في ذات تلك المهمات وعمل ذات كيف تأيية مبادرات النشر والأعمال غير الخاطرات التي أقصي إطلاقات عامات ورغم شركات مختلفة. البحث باستمرار الممارسات النشرية مميزات غير المرات أو غير المعروفة مسائلات ولد وعيات زينات مجلات الموضوعات المنبوذات المحظورات الذاتيات المخلقات اللغات المفرطات أو حتى المتخشفات الطبعات غير المربحات المنتهيات من السوق منفيات من الطبع نافذات تلك المبهمات المدفوعات للعمل خلف المظلات العنيدات كيفتائيات
مبادرات النشر المستقلة الرؤى المرفوضة أو الأعمال غير الحاضرات تلك التي أخصيت من الفضاءات العامات أو الراغبات في المشاركات بشروط مختلفات. البحث مستمر حول الممارسات النشريات المميزات غير المستقرات أو غير المعروفات المسائلات للحدود والإبداعيات والمهنيات والسياسات النضالات الواسعات لتوسيع رقعة الممكنات واكتشاف مواطن القوة والهشاشات الهائلات لبعض المقترحات المدنيات الأكثر إبداعات ضد أنظمة النشر المقيدات كيفتائيات